everyone. Welcome to African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie, and I'm here for an important talk today. We're going to talk about the role of radicalizing religion for Pan-Africanist revolution. So I'm happy to have all of you joining me, and I'm also happy to have a special guest, Brother Jimmy. Would you like to be called Brother Jimmy, or?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so before we get started with the conversation, so just to give everyone a brief overview, in case you're wondering, no, this is not a rebuttal video to the previous discussion I had with a number of brothers and sisters about Abrahamic religions. This is where I think, though, that conversation could have gone, and where I was hoping it would have gone. That is towards people who are organizers. How do we engage with people of different faiths, different communities, and actually move towards revolution together? Because if you understand the African experience currently, there's a few reasons I think this is important. One, in the African experience, about 80% of our brothers and sisters are either Christian or they're Muslim. And so this presents an issue for whether or not you subscribe to those faiths or not. That the issue is, how do you get people who have been put inside of religious systems used to many times tame their revolutionary instincts? How do you get those people to be motivated to actually engage inside of a liberation struggle? And my belief, true belief, is that a lot of the beliefs that these people hold can be utilized and weaponized to engage inside of the struggle. And I have to believe this personally because, many of you might not accept this or not, but me personally, I'm speaking from my personal experience. I know who I am, and I know who I was. And me personally, I don't think that I would have been doing a lot of the things that I'm doing had I not been inside of a Christian religion. Now, I did not start out, as some of you might have seen in a video I did not start out with a liberation mindset at all. I started out very much, I would say, with a colonial understanding of Christianity. But the more that I went on that journey of trying to learn for myself and not learn what someone taught me, the more that I became compelled to believe that the oppression, the murders, the enslavement, the colonized state, the exploitation of our people is something that should motivate us, or motivate me personally, to actually make this my go-to. So knowing who I was before, I was before that very inward thinking, I would say. And if any of you are inside of the activism space and committed to a liberation struggle, I'm sure you know that you can't be selfish, fighting for the liberation of your people. It just won't work, because you're going to have to make decisions, and you'll start making concessions because you'll be more consumed with yourself. And at that time, prior to having this transformation, I would say that was where my mind was. But one of the things that has happened for me is that I became very selfless and became more concerned with people. And that, to me, lets me know that there is something that can be done for our people, that we can actually engage everyone inside of this struggle. And I must admit, I don't know as much as I need to know. I'm going to make sure intentionally to start learning things about the Islamic faith. But that's also my intention. And our brother here, he also has a lot of scholarship inside of the Islamic faith. So he can also probably help me out more so with that. The other thing, though, I don't want us to lose is that our ancestors have given us a roadmap, I think, of how you actually do use these beliefs as a weapon to fight oppression. Me personally, I don't believe that you get Dr. King if he had not found a way to weaponize his Christian beliefs for his liberation. Specifically, if you think about the transformation of Dr. King after Vietnam, he was someone who was in a privileged position. He was in the high offices inside of America. He was meeting with the president. He had a lot to lose. For him to go from being the person who was going to be kind of like the Negro whisperer of the civil rights movement to doing something that completely turned the American tide against him, I don't think you get that person going there without his moral convictions. You can't be talking about nonviolence in America, and then you go and see the America inflicting violence on the world and just turn your head to that. I don't think you get Malcolm X. Some of you might have different feelings about the Nation of Islam. We have to respect the Nation of Islam. I don't believe you get Malcolm X without that transformation. You don't get him without Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm X told us this. I don't believe that you get him, the Pan-Africanist Malcolm X either. Like, these are all convictions that he had because of the moral sense that he had about his people. I don't think you get a Harriet Tubman going back, to be what she identified herself as Moses. She took that on and made it a weapon. So there are things that we can learn from our ancestors also. And I think that overall, if we just have an understanding that we have a situation that's been laid out for us, the situation is against our will, obviously. Many of our people have been forced into belief systems, but these belief systems have been very much crippling, have had a crippling effect to our unity. But if we can draw back from draw those principles and use those to attack this thing that we all face, I believe that that's a great opportunity for you if you're an organizer. So this is, again, more so, I call this an organizers platform, but everyone, you're invited to this conversation. So we're going to get started. For those who might not know you, Brother Jimmy, could you please introduce yourself and just tell us about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Tierney. So my name is Jimmy Butts. I give you a little bit of a background of my life and how I came to where I am today. I grew up in a Christian home, actually close to, where Nat Turner's rebellion took place in Virginia. So those are where my roots are located. And so my family was a very religious family. We went to church frequently, but my family also was wrecked, if you will, by the prison system. Everyone in my immediate family have all seen the inside of a jail cell. And, my older brothers, have been in and out of prison. I have a brother now that's still doing time. And so the prison system was something that was very, like something that was in front of my face throughout my whole life. And so I was surrounded by violence, and although I hated it, I at some point I had to realize that, I had to deal with the world as it was instead of dealing with the world as I hoped it to be. So initially, as a youngster, I would, get my tail beat, throughout, when I was at least in my younger school days. And as I said, there came a transformation when I said that, the world isn't this pretty fantasy that we make it out to be. And I need to adjust accordingly. Now, once again, we could debate whether that was a good decision or not, but that was my mentality at the time. And so, I got into, drugs. I got into guns, violence. And I pretty much knew that either death or prison was in my future. So, you can look at it, some people call it, family curses or generational curses. But as I've already mentioned, so I have two older brothers. They've been in and out of prison since as long as I can remember. And so for me, it was almost like it was inevitable that I knew I was going to end up there. There was no alternative. And so in reality, or excuse me, in the way I looked at the world, I couldn't really conceive of a life past the age of 25. And so I didn't plan for anything in the future. I just dealt with the here and now. And as you can suspect, that type of mentality oftentimes leads to those places of destruction that, I just mentioned, either death or imprisonment. And so that's exactly what happened to me. I eventually landed in prison, where I continued this lifestyle of violence. Um, it comes with the territory and to a certain degree. And so violence still characterized my life until I met a older gentleman who was fasting while we were incarcerated. And this intrigued me because if you know anything about, like the feeding habits of, jails and prisons, you know that they essentially just give you as little as possible to make sure you don't die. And so to see this man fasting, I thought it was weird and it struck me. And so I began conversing with him, and he told me some of the reasons why he did what he did. He was a Christian, and we began studying the Bible together. And through that process of, him mentoring me and me reading the Bible, I began to change. Like it changed my demeanor. It changed the way that I lived my life. It changed the way that I thought about the future. Uh, Another aspect of my background that I think is important for this discussion is, so when I was younger, I had encountered people of other faiths, such as, Muslims, even at an early age. I remember my father, who, as I've already mentioned, was a Christian as well. He, took me to try to go to the Million Man March when I was younger, and so I knew that, I knew that this was something, that Louis Farrakhan was, leading, and this was something that, was, as I said, led by Muslims. I wasn't able to go because they didn't want, women and children of my age at that time to come. And so I didn't end up being able to go, but that was an early encounter that I had with Islam. But so, circling back to when I was in prison, it was, I was encountering a lot of religious diversity. So, you had people who were Muslim, people who were Christian, and different varieties of those particular faiths. And so, this was fascinating to me. Although I was a Christian, I began to study with the Sunnis. I began, studying with the members of the Nation of Islam. Uh, I was studying with, the gods, during this time. And so, I would read the books that they were reading. They would let me borrow their books. So, this helped me to think about religion in less of a narrow way. And I found that religion was a way to connect with people. That, when you take a person's religion, you're taking, one of the most intimate aspects of their life. And so I felt that, if I could come to an understanding of people, and their religion, that would at least give me a starting point of dialogue, a starting point where, we have common ground that we could talk about. Eventually, throughout this time, I began to feel a call to pastoral ministry. And so, I began teaching the Bible while I was in prison. I actually was able to preach my first sermon.
How long were you in, by the way, if we can have more context, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, I was in 5 years and 3 months actually. Yes, yes. So yeah. So I preached my first sermon while I was incarcerated, and when I was released, I continued this pursuit of ministry and the academic study of religion. And so, actually, prior to my release, I received an associate's degree in biblical studies through like a prison correspondence course. Uh, then, I was able, after being released, I continued my education. I was able to get a bachelor's degree in Christian ministry. Then I pursued and completed a master's degree in Islamic studies. And I am now currently working on my PhD in Pan-African studies with a minor in religious studies.
So that's an interesting background, because let's go through this, because a lot of people would judge you, but you are a Christian and you undertook Islamic studies. That's one, and then also you went with Pan-Africanism. You're studying Pan-African studies.
Mm-hmm.
How do you explain that to someone with the traditional mindset? Because a lot of times when I'm talking to different people who profess to be Christians, when I speak about the issues of our people, you'll hear things like, you shouldn't be so concerned with race, or you should just show love. These are things that you're inviting hatred, stuff like that. So for those people, how did a brother who professes to be a Christian then study Islam and then also say, what, Pan-Africanism, this is the way for me?
Yes. So, I think, my life made it impossible for me to take that type of approach that you just described. And the people that I surrounded myself with, no one that I encountered, well, that may be, I don't want to say it like that. That may be overstating it, but very few, if any, people that I have encountered in my travels, held to a belief that, our religious views should or causes us to, not think about the here and now. Because you got to remember, I mean, I'm dealing with people who are in conditions that are not favorable. So I mean, I can see how you can have that position if you were a person from a privileged background, or if, yeah, I mean, but for me, I never had that mentality. The Muslims that I encountered, I mean, they were very much activist minded. The Christians as well. But when it comes to Pan-Africanism, as far as like the ideology, what brought me to that, to be honest with you, I think I found Malcolm's analysis convincing. It came from engaging with Malcolm, and understanding that trying to go about this liberation struggle on our knees begging white people to accept us is not going to be fruitful, and it hasn't been fruitful. And so the only way that we can move forward as a people, I mean, especially we as African Americans here as a minority, I mean, we can sit here try to convince white people that we're human, that we deserve equal rights, that we are being disproportionately hit with these negative aspects of our society. They can deny it all day, and there's nothing that we can really do about it but cry. But if we look at ourselves from a global perspective, from a Pan-Africanist perspective, we have power. We no longer have to get down on our knees and beg white people to accept us. As far as Pan-African studies, so my master's degree, I came at Malcolm X from an Islamic studies approach. And so, I mean, as you can see, Malcolm X is like the center of my, ideological and intellectual journey. So when I finished with my master's degree and decided to do further PhD or to do a PhD, I wanted to come at Malcolm from a different angle, from a Black studies angle, Afrocentric angle, and engage with his thought from that perspective. So yeah.
It's funny. I think, so my personal opinion, Malcolm probably brought like most people like into, no, I don't want to make a generalization, but in my experience, that a lot of people, it was Malcolm's analysis. I could say definitely for me, like I remember, and also Marcus Garvey's analysis. I don't want to say it was both of them, but when you listen to the ways that they were able to identify the same struggle, and I think that a lot of people back then specifically got turned off of him because of his faith, but he really basically had to go into these churches and tell them, like, stop focusing on this aspect of me. Like, we have something that we have in common. And of course, he had his mosque, but he made it his business to tell people, when we're in this space, he said, leave your religion at home. Let's come and deal with this common thing that we're dealing with. So if you could give just some more details. And like you said, Malcolm had a big, profound impact. What about Malcolm X is relevant to the Abrahamic religious people today becoming engaged in this struggle, fight for our freedom?
Yes. Well, I mean, Malcolm, I think, poses a problem for those. And let me back up for a second. So I just want to be clear that, I'm not trying to be antagonistic towards, our brothers and sisters who may have a different perspective here. But I will say that Malcolm, I think, poses a problem for those who, would suggest that holding on to an Abrahamic religion essentially, undercuts a desire for a liberation struggle. Although, Malcolm said, let's, come together with our like what we have in common, on the basis of what we have in common, and leave our religion at home. I think that some people interpret that as to mean that Malcolm's political pursuit was distinct from his religious convictions. And this is one aspect that my work actually challenges, that that Malcolm, I think when Malcolm is engaging with Christians and people of other faiths, what he tries to do is to become more diplomatic. He knows that, this one aspect of himself may cause division, may push people away. So because he is concerned about, the liberation struggle for Black people, he's willing to, at least rhetorically say, I'm going to separate my religion from my politics. But in reality, Malcolm did not see those two things as separate. He oftentimes said that, if there's a religion that does not allow me to fight for the freedom of my people, I say to hell with that religion. And so I think this is instructive for us as Black people, that Malcolm was willing to, once again, as I said, be diplomatic and come to the table and say, listen, we need to have unity. And I think this is something that, some of our brothers and sisters on the other side of the table, at least from the perspective about Abrahamic religions, I think that I would hope that they would at least take that approach and say, listen, we may disagree on religion, but let's keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah, and I will say, specifically with, I don't know all of them so well, but the people who were on the panel, all of the ones who I know well, that is their, like, that is definitely their way of moving, you know. And I can know that because a lot of them dealt with me beside the fact of my religion. But I think that there is an important issue, and I don't know how much me and you see eye to eye on this issue specifically. I do believe, and I've talked to Christians, I do believe that the faith, you know, even though it was corrupted, that the version that we have immobilizes a lot of us. And I don't want to say the same thing for Islam because I've not encountered that road as much. And honestly, from what I do observe, I do see our Islamic brothers and sisters more willing to have, you know, a degree of, you know, fight, you know, that I don't see same in the Christian community. So if you can talk, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you recognize that these things, it is immobilizing us, rightfully or wrongfully, you know, even though I definitely believe that people who take on that belief are completely neglecting their own Bible. You know, they're completely ignoring their own scriptures, their own Torah, their own whatever. Whenever you take a stance towards white supremacy that is conformist. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So it's a lot that can be said here. Excuse me. And I think there are ways that this could be simplified that could give a wrong impression. But I do think that if you look at Black history, let's just focus on America. So there's a book by a man named Gerard Wilmore, who it's called Black Religion and Black Radicalism. And he traces this trajectory in Black history where, you know, you have early on, you have Black people who are, you know, militantly against, you know, the white supremacist structure, who are Christian and Muslim. He traces this trajectory up until, you know, emancipation. And after emancipation, as Black people are striving to fit more into the broader culture, there is this sense of a de-radicalization of religion and Christianity in particular. Now, I think he would say even during those times, there were still Black people, there was still a strand of radical Black Christians who were activist minded, who were revolutionary minded. But there was a large group of Black people who became more concerned with trying to fit into the American project. And so anything that could isolate them or, you know, alienate them from the broader culture was avoided. However, you know, so let me just mention some things I think that has immobilized Black people within Christianity. So I think it'll be better if I be more specific, and then I'll move to Islam. So within Christianity, I think one aspect of Christianity, or at least the expression of Christianity that some people held on to that was immobilizing, was this notion that you know, we have to remove ourselves from our Africanness, that we had to you know,
Be without color, be without,
yes,
we're colorless.
yeah, exactly. You know, so this notion of, you know, I have to disassociate myself with my African background. It's evil, it's inferior, etc. Though that's one aspect of it. Also, and this is just my opinion, I think the teaching of nonviolence is another aspect that immobilizes Black Christian.
I'm glad you brought that up. We're
Some.
going to come back to that one. I really want to hear your thoughts on nonviolence, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, quickly, since we'll deal with this a little later, I would just say that there needs to be, so there is a distinction between nonviolence as a tactic and nonviolence as a lifestyle. So and there were people who represented both camps within our community, and so I think that's important. So I'll just leave that there, and we'll come back to that. But another aspect of the Christian faith that I think immobilized us is the weaponizing of love and forgiveness. So there's this idea of, loving your enemy. So now, as a Christian who believes in the Bible, I do believe that we should love our enemies. However, I don't think that means that if my enemy is attacking me, that the way I express my love is to bow down and let him harm me. I think that, uh, these notions of forgiveness, that we have to forgive our enemies. I believe, yes, as a Christian, I should forgive my enemies. But what I don't think that means is that I'm supposed to give up my, my rightful call for example, reparations.
Yeah, you love people as you love your neighbors as you love yourself. And I can't love myself, and I can't love you better if I would allow you to abuse me. So if you're abusing me, I must put it into that. If you're exploiting me, that must be done away with before I can even have the capacity to love anyone else. That's, I think, something that a lot of people miss.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And I can say more about that, but let me shift to Islam really quickly. And I think similarly in among Islam, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to offend my Muslim brothers or sisters. These are just my observations and what some scholars and even Muslims have, been critiquing as well. So, this seeking to be more Middle Eastern than African is something I think that immobilizes some Black Muslims. So you're rejecting your African background, your African culture, and you're seeking to be more Arab or Southeast Asian than you are African. And I experienced this, like some of my brothers, that I was incarcerated with, they took on like certain habits that were more Middle Eastern than they were African or African American. Also, the hesitancy to take a race-centered approach. Malcolm actually encountered this in his life. So close to the end of his life, there were some of his Sunni Muslim teachers and associates who tried to influence him to say, like, listen, you can't keep focusing on this race thing. Islam doesn't, deal with race in that matter. Like we're like the human, like we are, it's just humanity. And so I think, I've seen that type of expression of Islam among some African American Muslims as well. Lastly, before we move on, I think Ummah-centric liberation. Ummah-centric liberation is another immobilization to African liberation. And what I mean by that is, so the Ummah is the Muslim community. I mean, that's just a very basic definition of it. And so there's this notion that we protect Muslims. Muslims, like if Muslims are attacked, then we fight. If Muslims are, discriminated against, then we respond. But if it's someone else, I mean, that's not really our problem. Now, once again, I'm not here suggesting that the vast majority of Black Muslims think like this. All I'm saying that there are some. And so I think I'll just leave it there, and we can circle back to wherever you want to go to.
Okay, and I hope you don't mind. I want to put in a comment that someone made, try to make this interactive, So Brother Pioneer said, the words are clear in the Bible, slaves obey your master and turn the other cheek, but it also tells you to fight too. Pick and choose which parts you want to obey. Can you speak to that? I'll say that's one part of the Bible. I don't even know. I mean, one, I think there's relevance in saying that was said by the apostles and not by Yeshua. But do you think I'm off base from making that type of analysis, or what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that analysis. The approach that I think of, so when I approach scriptures in the Bible that talk about enslavement, I think one thing that hinders our interpretation, at least, is that we apply the modern context of slavery onto the ancient world. So that's number one. Some scholars have actually argued that in some cases slavery was akin to like employment, like you would sell yourself into
it was a way
slavery.
to like escape. In some instances, it was a way to like escape debt. Like if you owe debt to someone. And my understanding, this is all over Africa too. Like rather than be put into chains or something like that for something that you didn't pay back, you had the option to work your debt off. Is that right?
Yes. But on top of that, so I think that so when I read verses that talk about slaves obey your masters, how I think of them is that what Paul is saying is that if you are not going to resist the system, if you're not going to run away or fight, then you should strive to have you should strive to what's the word I'm looking for? Make this is a bad way of explaining this, but you should try to make your life as livable as possible. In other words, if you're not going to run away, if you're not going to fight, then you should live in such a way that's going to cause the least amount of harm on you and your community. And so I think that when he's saying slaves obey your masters, you're in a Roman context where Christians are a minority, and so an attempted uprising may seem futile. And so in some cases, this is similar to I think a few years ago, there was, during one of the protests, I can't remember which one it was, there was a woman who came out to the protest where her son was involved in. And I think there was, what some people call looting going on and burning
Baltimore.
buildings. Excuse me?
In Baltimore?
Maybe. I can't remember. I don't want to say which one because I can't remember. But all I know is that there's actual video footage of a mother coming out and essentially, dragging her son off of the front line from the protests. And I think there's a way of reading that into this type of experience, that the mother at that time was more concerned about the safety of her son than about the potential gains of that resistance at that time, that type of resistance at that time. And so in short, I think that there are some directives that people give in oppressed situations that are meant merely not as a all-encompassing command, but as a command that suggests that, for the time being, maybe, or, under these circumstances, you should try to carry yourself in a way that's not going to get you tortured or killed.
So let's get really specific. Islam and Christianity. Let's say I'm an organizer and I'm going to be inside of a Muslim community, or I'm going to be inside of a Christian community. How specifically, give me some specific concrete teachings that is going to bring these people into fighting for this system that's oppressing them, us all, to an end. You're muted, brother.
I'm so sorry. So, I would say that when you're thinking about Christianity, so I think I would begin with our roots. So I would say study figures like Nat Turner, figures like you have mentioned, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, to see how these people use their faith, and their faith was activated in their activism, if you will. I also think that, specifically for Christians, I think embracing the liberatory or the liberation message of Jesus that we see in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. Here you see Jesus saying that he came to set the captives free, to for liberation of the oppressed. And I think that if we realize as a Christian that the mission of our master, the mission of our Lord, was to set the captives free, then we have to govern ourselves accordingly. We have to follow in his footsteps. We have to be empowered by his example. And when we look at his life, we oftentimes see him setting himself with the marginalized and oppressed. Jesus, even some of his brothers and his disciples oftentimes criticize him, suggesting like, why aren't you, going with, the crowds? Why aren't you, doing it like this? But, Jesus oftentimes found himself with the disempowered, and he was healing them, and he was fighting for them. So the woman caught in adultery, Jesus liberated her. He set an ethical standard for her, but he did not allow that standard to come in the way of his fight for her. And I think that's important for us to see that, we oftentimes as Christians want to, try to play both sides of the field and say, well, look, there's some ethical, moral issues in our community, and therefore, we need to focus on them and stop worrying about, what the white man is doing. Well, if you're a Christian, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus didn't say, well, woman, stop committing sexual immorality and you won't have to worry about getting stoned. That's not what he said. Jesus dealt with her oppressors first, and then he gave a moral command or ethical command to her. So I think that that's instructive for us. We also see in the book of Proverbs, chapter 31, verse 8 and 9, where the Bible tells us to speak up for, the oppressed. And so I think there are many verses like this throughout the Bible that give precedent or that give instruction for us to live in such a way where we are, fighting for the liberation of our people. Now, for Muslim people, once again, I'm saying this as a non-Muslim, but as one who has at least listened to other Muslims and who have studied, Islam myself, I would say, like I said, with Christians, that, they need to study Muslims who resisted oppression. So those in the uprising in Brazil, how did they think about their faith in Islam as they fought and rebelled against their oppressors. Um, I think there's a surah in the Quran, Surah 4, ayat 75 or verse 75, where it tells Muslims to fight for the oppressed. So this is another application of this Abrahamic faith that could be utilized to say that, okay, as a Muslim, you should be fighting for the oppressed. And lastly, I would say, Malcolm cited Surah 2, verse 190, where he says that, that we should fight against those who fight against us. And so, Malcolm saw this particular instruction as applicable to the political struggle of Black people. So I think that, Muslims can do the same.
Okay, so I want to go back to the issue of nonviolence. So my opinion, so I don't have necessarily a personal philosophy. I do believe that I do believe in self-defense. I do believe, though, that when people like Dr. King, and we respect him, give him honor, obviously, for the fact that he died for, African people. I believe that it's unfair for you personally to have a belief in nonviolence and to try to make that the belief of the oppressed. The reason is because, to me, every single action has a reaction. So if you're constantly being beaten, you're constantly being stolen from, you're constantly being raped of everything, you're gonna strike back. And to me, I don't think there should be any person who goes to the oppressed and says, hey, you should not have a reaction to this. To me, the only focus of any wrongdoing has to be the system that's actually causing it. And then I also believe that it's our duty to go to the people and say that if we're going to strike back, it has to be strategic. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So I want to be careful because we're on a public domain.
Right,
So
you're
some
right.
conversations we can have amongst ourselves, and others, we can have publicly. So
Absolutely.
let me just give that as a disclaimer. However, I mean that's not necessarily to say that I'm not going to be truthful. I think that so first let me say that I have the utmost respect for Martin Luther King Jr. and others who fought non-violently. I think that I think we as a people have to be able to distinguish from when I disagree with a person's approach versus saying that that person is not trying, at least to the best of their ability.
I can't get over like when people call Dr. King like a cool. I'm like, what are you doing that's even measures up? Like it's always with people who aren't involved. That's the thing that drives me nuts. Like you can't do that. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I mean, you're right though. Even Kwame Ture, make that same statement that, while he didn't necessarily take on, a complete nonviolent approach or at least ideology, he said that, listen, I mean, people out here criticizing Dr. King, I mean, at least Dr. King, he taught nonviolence and he practiced nonviolence. He was actually out here on the front line getting rocks thrown at him, putting his body on the line, to fight for our people. And so I think that's instructive as well. But let me make a couple of comments. So do I think that in some cases, not a nonviolent tactic may be the most prudent? I would say in some cases, maybe. But I think that as a Christian, because people oftentimes bring up the text in the Bible where Jesus says, turn the other cheek. I think their interpretation of that verse though is like I don't necessarily agree with. I think what Jesus is telling us is that as believers, we have to be willing to go the extra mile to keep the peace. I think that's essentially what it's saying. I think that if violence can be avoided, then the Christian should take that route. But if violence cannot be avoided, I think we have to do what we have to do. I think I'm of the tradition of Nat Turner. I told you that's I grew up close by. To me, it's just something in the soil there. But I think that Nat Turner was a righteous, religious man, and I think that his approach was righteous as well. So I think nonviolence, in some tactical sense, it could be useful in some cases, but I don't think that Black people should ever, subscribe to a complete nonviolent approach. In fact, I'm encouraging Black people, to arm yourself. I think that we should be armed. I mean, when we look at the news and we see, Black women, being harassed and attacked, and Black people in general just being harassed and attacked, I think that, you need to be equipped to defend yourself.
Absolutely. I want to talk some about what do you identify? I can't stand, to be completely honest. I think we had a little difference about this when we talked on the phone, but I can't stand the vast majority of, I'll say, just TV preachers. I don't want to talk about individual because I've been in local churches that does not have the same thing, but I just see so much corruption, fundamentally. And almost honestly everything, to the point where I feel like, do you guys even, or can we even really look at these preachers and call them Christian? Like, how are you, I'm not going to list the person buying a private jet, with tithes and offerings? How are you going and living in a mansion? How? What is your reaction to, like you said, I mean, it went from being something that was responsive to the community, and then it became something that conformed to the capitalist system. And overwhelmingly, that's what we see, to the point where I feel like people are afraid to even ask, what's happening with that money? What's happening with, the money that all of you are raising? Why aren't we seeing it? Why isn't it doing anything for us? Why isn't it being distributed to us? But what are your thoughts on this modern, evangelical wave of Christianity that is very impactful? I think honestly, when you look at, they said, I think at this moment, if not recently or coming, Christianity became the majority religion inside of Africa, and overwhelmingly, I feel like it's because of the evangelical craze.
Yes. So, so let me just state clearly first. I think that a pastor or religious leader that is using their position to enrich themselves is evil. Point blank. I do think that I do think that the preachers that we see on TV who function in this way are a very small minority of preachers. I think the vast majority of Black pastors are attempting to use shoestring budgets to address issues in the community that are far beyond their capabilities. So this is not, so once again, so this is not to say that you don't have even pastors of smaller, less wealthy churches who mismanage the money of the church. I do, however, think that, there's this caricature of the black church or the black pastor who, is just enriching himself off of the community and not giving back. Um, you know, there's a book by C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence Mamiya. It's called The Black Church in the African American Experience. And these scholars actually apply. So this is sort of a dated book. So let me admit that I think this actually came out in like the mid 90s or something like that. But the book uses social science research to, look at the way in which black preachers are involved in community organizing. And what it seemed that they concluded was the vast majority of the black churches or black pastors that they, from their research study, were actually involved in striving to engage the community in a positive way. Now we can debate what consists of, like striving for liberation. But I think once again, it's like that distinction between tactic and intention. So a black pastor may say, having meals on Wednesdays is one way that he's trying to impact the community. Another person may look at that and say, well, hold on, what are you doing to help the political struggle of black people? And I would look at both of them and say, well, yeah, I do think that black pastor can do more. He probably is doing more. But you can't just say that him trying to feed the community is not doing anything. You see what I'm saying?
We can't put our different people's level of political consciousness on people who aren't there. I mean, so I'll say for me personally, I was very disturbed when the Palestinian crisis happened and the church was silent. And I'm always disturbed by silence, but I think this one was more disturbing. One, because particularly us in America, like this is literally our tax dollars that are funding this. But two, I think a lot of people are afraid to address Israel because they believe this is the Israel of the Bible. And that was something that really just pissed me off because that's a political issue where I think that the church, and by the way, let me say, there are some churches that are fundamentally opposed to the state of Israel. I actually seen it was like an open letter, and a number of churches signed the open letter. But overwhelmingly, like that's not something that is discussed. And again, this could be my background because the church I grew up in was, it was kind of like a mega church mentality, I would say. But I got so teed off that it seems like sometimes our empathy is selective, particularly whenever it's anything, because we're taught, and I would say in the evangelical experience, that America is the pinnacle of righteousness, which to me is a complete BS. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know if you had thoughts on what happened with that whole catastrophe.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, I've spoke about this a little bit in the past in regards to so let me just think of the African American response to Israel, and the injustices that are going on. I think if you look at African American history and thought, there has oftentimes been competing ideologies in regards to global issues. So even when we think about the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in the 1930s, I could be blanking. I think that's right. But there were many black people who jumped up and said that, listen, we need to support, Ethiopia. Like, those are our brothers and sisters over there. Like, we have to, engage this issue. There were others, however, who argued that, listen, we have enough problems here of our own. We're barely able to fight against the issues that we're dealing with. We barely have resources. So let's go back to that church pastor who everybody in the community is saying, look, you ain't doing enough for the community. You ain't doing enough for the community. He giving everything he has. And then you tell him, oh yeah, you need to be involved in and engage with the stuff going on the other side of the world. So listen, I'm not saying that we should take that approach. I actually think that, we should condemn injustice anywhere. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But also I think there's a theological issue here too. Among some Christians, that when they read the Bible, they see passages in the text that talk about a future Israel where so this future Israel is being oppressed, and God will come and deliver them, destroy their enemies, and deliver them from their oppression. So some people read that and say that, look, I mean, although I don't agree with what's going on over there in Israel, I don't want to find myself on the side of people attacking Israel when the Messiah comes to destroy Israel's enemies. Okay, so some people take that approach. Others suggest that, well, the Israel prophesied in those passages is not necessarily ethnic Israel. Is referring to the church. But whichever side of that whole dilemma you stand on, I think it's clear that even if, let's just put this in a framework of another church. If I'm a Christian and another church is practicing injustice, I have a moral obligation to condemn it and to resist it. So I think that same applies when it comes to, even if I subscribe to the theology that says the Israel that's in the state of Israel today are those that God prophesies that he's going to come and return and destroy their enemies. I think that if they are practicing oppression, you would still be morally obligated to resist it.
Yeah, and I think it just so I agree. Like there's regardless of where you stand, you should not be okay with oppression. And I also think that a lot of people just aren't thinking independently. Like, I'm learning more because I'm going back to like research things and really figure out, where did this idea come from? I'm learning more that people have imposed their interpretations of biblical text or Islamic text, and like we just accept it because this is the way that it reads without actually understanding it. So like with the Israel thing, first, I'm sure most of you should know Palestinians are more ethnically related to the original Hebrews. But despite that, regardless of that, we should also understand that if you're coming from the viewpoint that oppression is okay, then I would be very curious to know what makes you think that oppressing Muslims, if you think they're all Muslims, some of them are Christians, but even if they were all Muslims, where do you think that actually stands as far as morals? And so, I get frustrated with the fact that some of us accept these doctrines without even wanting to know where they're from, because I'm learning like a lot of things, like the ways that we read these texts were determined like 50, 70 years ago, and by people who were
by white people
who were of white supremacist ideology, and we're so unable to challenge these things because we just believe if it's the pastor saying it, then it must be God saying it. So with that, I think getting to starting to wrap up, I think that's a perfect segue into the issue of decolonization. What do you feel about people saying decolonize Abrahamic faith, decolonize? I see a lot more of Christian. Again, I'm not so well versed in Islam. And by the way, guys, reached out to a brother who is Islamic. I'm trying to get him on. But if you are someone who is actually of that faith, who's Pan-Africanist and for the liberation of the people, you can always email me, let me know what work you've done, like let me have a sense of where you are ideologically and what you contribute to the community, because I want a variety of perspectives. I don't want it to be singular, but on both fronts, Christianity, Islam. What do you feel about the idea of decolonizing? Can it be done? What are the moves that we should be making? And, what are the action items?
Yeah. So let me answer that question in a different way first, and then I'll answer it directly. So when we look at, for example, the Pan-African movement itself, you see people in the Abrahamic faiths front and center throughout it. So the author of the earliest the earliest written articulation of Pan-Africanism or Pan-African consciousness was a Christian, David Walker, in David Walker's Appeal. So one of the first Pan-African organizations, called the Sons of Africa, was established in the 1780s by Oluwado Equiano. He was deeply Christian. Lot Carey was a Christian who taught that African Americans had a responsibility to help Africa. Edward Blyden, who some dispute whether he was a Christian or maybe Muslim, but either way, he was a strong Pan-Africanist, and he called for repatriation into Africa. Martin Delany, Bishop Henry McNeill Turner, Alexander Crummell, not least to speak of Earl Little and Malcolm X. These were all people who fought for this Pan-African consciousness, and who held to Abrahamic faith. So, and these are people who are central to that discourse. And so, if someone says that, holding on to these faiths hinders Pan-African liberation, like, I have to ask myself, like, well, what were these? It seems like these people found a way to do it. And so I think to answer your question a little bit more directly, I think one of the first things that we have to do is that we have to reject the interpretations or the hermeneutic of our oppressors. These are the very things that our ancestors did when they took on these religions. I think so. There's this myth that Black people just mindlessly took on these religions prepackaged as they were given to us by our oppressors. But if you take a look at, for example, the spirituals and other early writings about this early context, you're seeing Black people making a distinction between what they believed and what their oppressors believed. So there's one that goes, everybody talking about heaven ain't going. And what many people have said is that, when this was sung, people were oftentimes looking back toward the big house as they were making this statement. Black people recognize that, okay, what their masters or their oppressors was giving them had some truth to it. But we have to decolonize it, if you will, to remove the aspects of that faith that seeks to legitimize their domination over us. Secondly, I think that we have to, embrace our faith and our Africanness. So we have to be willing to say that I can be fully my African self and practice my religious beliefs. So what that means is that I'm no longer seeking to look like a Middle Easterner in my dress. I'm no longer trying to look like white people or worship like the white church. We got to be got to be quiet. We don't want to, look undignified. This was some of this is some of the ideology that was actually in the early Black church. That as some of these more northern metropolitan areas where some of the early Black churches were popping up, like some of these ministers, as a way of striving to, at least in their mind, improve their people, they were saying, listen, we have to get away from those old practices. Those wild.
They painted Jesus white, or Yeshua made him Jesus, painted him white, and everything that was good is white. And so over time, obviously, the message is you have to become like us. Mm-hmm. You have to become as close to us as you can, and anything that's of you, anything that's of you culturally, it's not civilized. You want to be a European, and I see it everywhere, honestly.
Yes. And once again, there is this myth in our community that, this only happens among Black Christians. But if you poke around in the literature of Black Muslims, you'll see that the very things that we're talking about right now that happens among Black Christians happens among Black Muslims as well. So this is just on my mind simply because I just recently taught this in a class that I did on religion and hip hop. There's a professor by the name of Dr. Suad Kabir. She wrote a book called Muslim Cool. And in this particular book, she talks about how there is this anti-Blackness in Muslim communities. And Muslims are oftentimes asked to do away with their culture, with their African or African American culture, and become more like Arab or, Asian people. And so I think that, the way we decolonize is rejecting those types of interpretations of our faith and accept the fact that God accepts us. He created us this way, so he accepts us as we are, at least in our created sense. And we can be faithful to our religion as we, be as we faithful to our Africanness as well.
Yeah, and something I remember you tweeted before I ever got to communicate with you about the panel we did on Abrahamic religions, about the oppression of people who do practice traditional faiths. You see a lot of people who are persecuting them. And if you are someone who believes, I'll speak for Christianity, like I don't know how you can possibly think that you are standing in the right by doing any type of even if it's not even like violence, doing anything to make anyone below you who is another person. I mean, it's just doesn't measure up. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, is that we have to be analytical. Are we doing these things because these are our religious beliefs, or is this the white man who inhabited us? I remember there's a speech of Amos Wilson, Dr. Amos Wilson, and I think it's just so true when he says that, like, we're possessed by a white demon. And the same way that if you look out, if you're possessed by a demon, you look out, you're seeing what the demon sees. So you're seeing through white eyes, and you're speaking like your oppressor, and you're thinking like your oppressor. So it's like a demon is like literally inside of you. And so many of us, we're going out and unleashing this on the world because we think that this is right, but nothing of that is something that embodies, at least if you're just going by the scriptural interpretation, embodies the scriptural interpretation. So I think that was another point I wanted to make.
Yeah. Did you have time for me to say some more?
Yeah. I mean, we'll wrap up whenever you're ready, but.
Okay, let me just say this last thing. I would say that yes, Carter G. Woodson, spoke of this from a more social education aspect of the miseducation of the Negro and taking on this white mentality. You also see Frantz Fanon using psychoanalysis to make that same type of analysis that you just stated here, that we're conditioned into looking at the world from a white perspective. So I remember, so I'm thinking about some of the things that some of our brothers and sisters said previously. And so I think that we have to make a distinction here. So I think there's a way in which people of Abrahamic faiths can say, listen, we are brothers and sisters, and we're going to support one another. But that doesn't necessarily mean when you bow down and perform salat that I'm going to bow down with you. And I don't think that if I say I'm not going to do that, that I'm necessarily saying that I think I'm better than you. I just have a different religious perspective. And if brothers and sisters, are, worshiping or, doing other aspects of, traditional African faiths, I can say that, listen, I'm with you 100%, but I'm going to say that when you want to do your personal religious rituals, then I'm going to respect you, let you do that, but I'm not necessarily going to participate. I think that's saying one thing versus me coming and saying that Muslims are evil and Islam is corrupting the world, or traditional African beliefs are inferior, and they're
Some people
demonic.
say things like any reference towards the ancestors is demonic,
Yeah.
a lot of these things that we're just not critical about, when we just reverberate.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is, it seems that sometimes when people make a different, like when people say that I'm not going to I may not participate in your religious practices, that can be interpreted as saying that I think I'm better than you, or I don't want to be connected with you. And I think that's just wrong. I do think that there has been a long history of Christians, Black Christians as well, who have, terrorized, if you will, at least, criticize and look down on people of other faiths. So we can't dispute that. We can't act like that didn't happen. But I don't think that could be collapsed into this notion of, listen, brother, I'm with you. I'm standing here side by side with you when we out here on the battlefield. But when you have to perform your prayer, I'm going to let you do yours. I'm going to do mine. Like I don't think that that's suggesting anything negative there.
It's tolerance. I mean,
yeah,
Africans, if you know Africans historically, we're naturally a tolerant people. And I think that goes back to the embodiment of white supremacy, where all of a sudden it's everyone has to think like I do. I can believe my faith. I can practice my faith. I cannot believe your faith. But if I treat you differently, that's whenever it's crossing a line. Whenever I treat you like you're no longer my brother or my sister, or like you don't have the right, that's where you cross the line. And so I think it's all about tolerance. So I think that's all I have. What do you have anything else you want to touch on before we? leave off. I've had fun. I think you should definitely come back. I really like your perspective.
Thank you. I mean, nothing really. I mean, I just want to say that, you know, I appreciate you and what you've done. Appreciate the discussions that you've had that I've been able to look at. And, you know, I just think that, you know, we as a people have to be able to realize that just because, you know, our understanding of a particular faith may say that it's oppressive, we have to, at the very least, acknowledge that there have been some African people for whatever reason. I don't like we can make up whatever reason we want to, but they were able to simultaneously hold to this particular faith and be a warrior on the battlefield for African people. So I just want to make that point clear that I don't think that you can do I don't think an honest look at our history can substantiate the notion that being a part of an Abrahamic religion automatically makes you anti-liberation. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you once again.
And thank you. And I hope, you know, any of you who are in organizations, any of you working with the people, I hope, you know, this conversation gave you some ideas, because my personal opinion is that I don't think we can truly have a revolution if we're not getting everyone. Not everyone's going to be involved, but you need a good amount to actually see the reason why being radicalized enough to fight, you know, that's something that's going to be necessary. And so I hope that you guys got some jewels from this. Brother Jimmy, like I said, thank you for coming. I'm sure I'll have you back, because there's a lot of like issues. I want to say specifically in the modern context of things that come up. So maybe I can get your perspective on that in the future. And as I said, anyone else, if you're of any beliefs that want to share, you know, and you can just let me know like what you've done, your writings, or where you've work that you've done for the people, you know, that's very important. So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoy. I will see you guys in the next stream or video.